July 16, 1945, Potsdam, Germany. President Harry Truman sits at his desk in the Little White House, a villa in the bombed-out suburbs of Berlin. He's just received an urgent coded message from Washington. The message is short but world-changing. Operated on this morning. Diagnosis not yet complete, but results seem satisfactory. Truman understands the code. It means the atomic bomb test in New Mexico has succeeded. The United States now possesses the most powerful weapon ever created by human beings, a single bomb that can destroy an entire city, a weapon that could end the war with Japan without an invasion, a weapon that changes everything. But Truman hasn't told most of his military leaders about this weapon. General Dwight Eisenhower, the supreme commander who led Allied forces to victory in Europe, knows nothing about it. Eisenhower is here at Potsdam as an advisor, but nobody has briefed him on the Manhattan Project. He has no idea that while he's been planning conventional warfare, scientists in the New Mexico desert have been building something that makes conventional warfare obsolete. Truman decides it's time to tell Eisenhower. A few days later, he pulls Eisenhower aside for a private conversation. What happens in that conversation will haunt both men for the rest of their lives. Because when Truman tells Eisenhower about the atomic bomb and asks for his opinion, Eisenhower says something that Truman doesn't want to hear. Eisenhower tells him not to use it. This is the story of that conversation, what was said, why it mattered, and how it reveals the moral divide between two men who would both become president. It's about the moment when the architect of D-Day tried to stop the weapon that would kill 200,000 Japanese civilians, and it's about why Truman went ahead anyway. Let's go back to understand how we got here. The Manhattan Project began in 1942. It was a massive scientific effort to build an atomic bomb before Nazi Germany could build one. The project cost $2 billion and employed over 130,000 people working at secret facilities across the United States. It was the most closely guarded secret of World War II.
The secrecy was extraordinary. Even Vice President Harry Truman didn't know about it. When he became president on April 12, 1945, after FDR's death, Secretary of War Henry Stimson had to tell him about the Manhattan Project for the first time. Truman was shocked. As vice president, he'd been completely kept in the dark about a weapons program that cost billions of dollars. Military leaders were also kept out of the loop. General Douglas MacArthur, commanding in the Pacific, didn't know. Admiral Chester Nimitz didn't know. And General Dwight Eisenhower, despite being supreme commander in Europe, didn't know either. Eisenhower had just finished winning the war in Europe. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. Eisenhower had orchestrated the D-Day invasion, the liberation of France, and the final push into Germany. He was arguably the most famous and successful general in the world. But nobody had told him that scientists were building a weapon that could have made much of his work unnecessary. In July 1945, Truman, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and Soviet leader Joseph Stalin met at Potsdam outside Berlin to discuss the post-war order. Truman brought Eisenhower along as a military advisor. The main topic was what to do about Japan. Germany was defeated, but Japan was still fighting. The question was how to end the Pacific War. The Pentagon was planning Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan. The plan called for landing on Kyushu in November 1945 and on Honshu in March 1946. The military estimated it would cost hundreds of thousands of American casualties and millions of Japanese casualties. The Battle of Okinawa, which had just ended, gave everyone a preview of how bloody an invasion of the home islands would be. The Japanese had fought essentially to the last man. Civilians had committed suicide rather than surrender. But now Truman had an alternative. The atomic bomb could potentially force Japan to surrender without an invasion. On July 16th, the Trinity test in New Mexico succeeded beyond expectations. The bomb worked. It had the power of 20,000 tons of TNT. It could obliterate a city. Truman was excited. This weapon could save American lives. It could end the war quickly. It could also send a message to Stalin that America had power the Soviet Union couldn't match. Truman saw the atomic bomb as a solution to multiple problems. But he wanted military advice. What did his generals think? Should he use this weapon on Japanese cities? Was it militarily necessary? Secretary of War Henry Stimson briefed Eisenhower on the atomic bomb sometime around July 20th. The exact date isn't certain, but we know it happened at Potsdam. Stimson explained the Manhattan Project, described the successful test, and told Eisenhower that the bomb would probably be used against Japan within weeks. Eisenhower's reaction was immediate and negative. He later described the conversation in multiple places, including his memoirs and interviews. His accounts are consistent. When Stimson told him about the bomb, Eisenhower felt depressed by the news. He told Stimson that Japan was already defeated and that using the bomb was unnecessary. A few days later, Truman himself spoke with Eisenhower about the bomb. The conversation took place at the Little White House in Potsdam. No other witnesses were present, so we have only Truman's and Eisenhower's accounts of what was said. Eisenhower later recalled, "I voiced to him my grave misgivings, first on the basis of my belief that Japan was already defeated and that dropping the bomb was completely unnecessary, and secondly, because I thought that our country should avoid shocking world opinion by the use of a weapon whose employment was, I thought, no longer mandatory as a measure to save American lives." This was a remarkable statement for Eisenhower to make. He was essentially telling the president that using the atomic bomb would be both militarily unnecessary and morally wrong. Japan was going to surrender anyway, Eisenhower argued. The blockade and conventional bombing were working. The Soviet Union entering into the war would seal Japan's fate. The atomic bomb wasn't needed. Eisenhower had multiple reasons for this position. First, as a military man, he believed the bomb was unnecessary. Japan's military situation was hopeless. The Japanese Navy was destroyed. The Air Force was decimated. The home islands were under constant bombing. Food supplies were running out. The Soviet Union was about to enter the war against Japan. From a purely military standpoint, Japan couldn't continue fighting much longer. Second, Eisenhower worried about what using such a weapon would mean for future warfare. If the United States normalized the use of atomic weapons, what would stop other countries from developing and using them? Eisenhower foresaw that opening this door could lead to an arms race and potentially to weapons that could destroy civilization.
Third, Eisenhower had moral concerns. He'd just spent months in Europe seeing the devastation of war. He'd seen destroyed cities, displaced populations, mass suffering. The idea of deliberately obliterating Japanese cities with a single bomb troubled him. Yes, conventional bombing had already destroyed many Japanese cities, but there was something different about a weapon that could kill 100,000 people in an instant. Eisenhower expressed these concerns to Truman during their conversation. He didn't argue loudly or try to change Truman's mind forcefully. That wasn't Eisenhower's style. He stated his opinion clearly but respectfully. The president asked for his view, and he gave it honestly. Truman's reaction was not positive. Eisenhower later said Truman was upset by his opposition. Truman didn't want to hear arguments against using the bomb. He'd already made up his mind. He believed using the bomb was the right decision, and he didn't appreciate a general telling him otherwise. Truman's reasoning was different from Eisenhower's. Truman believed the bomb would save American lives by making an invasion unnecessary. The Pentagon had estimated that invading Japan could cost 500,000 American casualties or more. If the atomic bomb could prevent that invasion, using it was justified. Truman also wanted to end the war quickly. Every day the war continued, more people died. American sailors were being killed by kamikaze attacks. Prisoners of war were suffering in Japanese camps. Allied bombing was killing Japanese civilians. If the atomic bomb could end all of this quickly, why wouldn't you use it?
There was also the political dimension. Truman had spent $2 billion on the Manhattan Project. If he ended the war without using the bomb, and Americans later found out he'd had this weapon available but didn't use it, they would ask why their sons had to die when a weapon existed that could have saved them. Truman would be crucified politically. And there was the Stalin factor. Truman wanted to demonstrate American power to the Soviet Union. The wartime alliance with Stalin was already fraying. Tensions were building over Poland, Germany, and Eastern Europe. Having a weapon that the Soviets didn't possess gave America leverage. Using the atomic bomb would show Stalin that America had capabilities beyond anything the Soviets could match. So when Eisenhower argued against using the bomb, Truman wasn't receptive. The president had his reasons, and Eisenhower's moral qualms weren't going to change his mind.
The conversation ended without resolution. Eisenhower had stated his position, Truman had listened but wasn't persuaded. The decision was the president's to make, not the general's. Eisenhower's role was to give advice when asked. He'd done that. Now Truman would do what he thought was right. On July 26th, the Potsdam Declaration was issued. It called for Japan's unconditional surrender and warned of prompt and utter destruction if Japan refused. The declaration didn't mention the atomic bomb explicitly, but Truman and his advisors knew what the utter destruction would be. Japan didn't surrender. The government was split. Some leaders wanted to accept the Potsdam Declaration. Others wanted to keep fighting in hopes of getting better terms. The Japanese government couldn't reach a decision. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber called Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The bomb killed approximately 70,000 people instantly, with tens of thousands more dying from radiation in the following months. The city was obliterated. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, killing approximately 40,000 people instantly. That same day, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The war was over. Eisenhower learned about Hiroshima while still in Europe. His reaction was not celebratory. He felt vindicated in his concerns, but took no satisfaction in being right. He believed the bomb had been unnecessary and that Japan would have surrendered anyway, especially once the Soviets entered the war. Years later, Eisenhower would speak publicly about his opposition to using the atomic bomb. In a 1963 interview with Newsweek, he said, "The Japanese were ready to surrender, and it wasn't necessary to hit them with that awful thing." He maintained this position consistently for the rest of his life. Truman, conversely, never expressed regret. He believed he'd made the right decision. He said the atomic bomb saved lives by making an invasion unnecessary. When critics questioned the decision, Truman defended it vigorously. He never wavered publicly in his conviction that using the bomb was justified.
The disagreement between Truman and Eisenhower over the atomic bomb reveals fundamental differences in how they saw the world. Truman was a pragmatist. He made decisions based on outcomes. If using the bomb saved American lives, it was the right choice, regardless of moral complications. Eisenhower was more troubled by the moral dimensions. He worried about setting precedents, about how using such weapons would affect future warfare, about the human cost even to enemy civilians. He believed some things shouldn't be done even if they might be militarily effective. Neither man was simply right or simply wrong. The decision to use the atomic bomb remains one of the most controversial in American history. Historians still debate whether it was necessary, whether Japan was about to surrender anyway, whether there were alternatives that weren't fully explored. What's clear is that when Truman asked Eisenhower for his opinion, Eisenhower gave it honestly. He said using the bomb was unnecessary and ill-advised. He worried about the moral implications and the precedent it would set. He spoke from his conscience and his military judgment. Truman listened but disagreed. He made the decision to use the bomb, and he never regretted it. The war ended, American servicemen came home, Japan surrendered without an invasion.
From Truman's perspective, the ends justify the means. But Eisenhower's words stayed with both men. Years later, when both had served as president, the memory of that conversation at Potsdam remained. Truman remembered Eisenhower questioning his judgment. Eisenhower remembered Truman dismissing his concerns. The irony is that Eisenhower, who opposed using the atomic bomb, would later build America's nuclear arsenal to unprecedented levels as president. He relied on nuclear weapons as a deterrent and as a cost-effective defense strategy. He threatened to use nuclear weapons in Korea and other crises. Did this make Eisenhower a hypocrite? Not necessarily. Eisenhower's position was consistent. He opposed using atomic weapons against a defeated enemy that was about to surrender. But he believed in maintaining nuclear weapons as a deterrent to prevent war. He saw a distinction between using the bomb offensively against cities and possessing it defensively to prevent aggression.
Truman, meanwhile, had to live with the decision for the rest of his life. He never expressed regret, but those close to him said the weight of it affected him. He'd ordered the deaths of over 100,000 people in an instant. That's not something any person carries lightly, regardless of whether they believe it was necessary. The conversation at Potsdam between Truman and Eisenhower represents a crucial moment in history. It was the moment when the man who would use the atomic bomb met the man who would oppose it. Two future presidents, one making the most consequential decision of the war, the other warning against it. What Eisenhower said when Truman told him about the atomic bomb was simple but profound. Don't use it. Japan is already defeated. It's unnecessary and wrong. Truman didn't listen. History will forever debate whether he should have. This video presents historical events based on documented records, including Eisenhower's memoirs, Truman's papers, Stimson's accounts, and scholarly research on the decision to use the atomic bomb. Historical interpretations vary among historians and scholars. Viewers are encouraged to consult multiple sources when studying this period of American history. This content is intended for educational purposes.